Thank you so much for staying tuned to this channel. Welcome to another edition of International Forum. My name is Wilson Omasho. Today is all about the twists and turns. We're talking about the Iranian nuclear deal and, of course, this so-called shadow war between Iran and Israel. You're raging on. Many questions have been asked about how Hamas, in the first instance, they were able to get thousands of rockets that is shot against Israel. What about the nuclear deal? Because Trump is out of the picture, that's the reason why Iran are beginning to trying to expand on their accomplishment. We talk about harnessing nuclear capabilities, and right now they are saying that they're going to give one month extension for the people that are in charge of monitoring your nuclear plants to remain in Iran. After that, they're going to do what they want to do. Do you think Israel will fold back their arms, sit, relax, and see them have that nuclear capability? All these and more we'll take a look at on the discussion segment. Before that, let's go to some stories making the rounds globally. Let's take a look at what is happening between Israel and Palestine. Right now, there's been this ceasefire agreement. Yeah, the ceasefire agreement between both sides, because both sides are claiming victory. Palestinians on the other hand said, look, we're able to do at least a reasonable amount. They're talking about the Hamas terror group, but to some Palestinians, the Hamas group that are freedom fighters, they are, according to report, they are liberators. You understand, but Joe Biden was able to speak sense into these persons to please stop fire. They should cease fire because of the number of casualties recorded, to the extent that it's like nobody really wants to talk more about this because of the perception of the world, saying why would Israel and of course the Palestinians always get involved, get embroidered in all this kind of fight. Don't forget that the last, all of a sudden, Hamas started throwing rockets at Israel. But thank God for their Iron Dome and all that they were able to deflect so many. The word like that, the way Israel really meant devastation on Hamas group, ever affecting other persons around the Palestinian territory, is not that cool. It's not called for. That caution should be taken so that the world will know that Israel is truly a country of peace. Well, we try to talk to both sides. Let's see what would be the next step of action, or the next line of action in the ceasefire accord. Is it going to exceed 7 years? Is it going to exceed 1 year, 1 month, 2 months, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Or will Hamas or Israel spark again a reaction that may lead to rocket being launched at both ends? We are watching to see how Joe Biden can really solve this so-called palaver. Now let's move straight down to Malaysia, where there was a train with train transport. Sometimes, if time isn't taken, maybe due to the error of commission or commission or omission, the train can just go berserk. And when a train goes berserk, especially those kind of speed train, devastating, tendencies may just occur that may lead to the loss of lives and destruction of properties. Now that was the case of what happened in Angle. But when a train loses control, maybe due to brake failure, or maybe due to emotional stress on the part of the driver or the controller of that train, it may lead to wanton loss of lives and properties. That is what they really experienced in Malaysia. This thing happened in Japan, and yes, the transportation, if I'm making a mistake here, was asked to resign because of what happened. Because if something goes awry and they discover that the person or group of persons responsible of that particular segment isn't bringing forth good answers, then the next good thing for that person to do is to resign. Let's see how far they can really go when you talk about reducing train wreckages to the barest minimum globally. We're talking about developed climes right now. Moving on, let's get straight down to what is happening in Sudan. Yes, talk about a state of emergency in Sudan. what really caused the state of emergency? People have been talking so much because of the fight, because of so many other distortions and misunderstanding. You get to realize that somewhere along the line, if time isn't taken the political tension, there may just be disagreements here and there. All right, couple the father have COVID-19 and all other political tension coming together to give you a kind of disarray, if not well, for life to return to normal when you talk about the people in Sudan. Don't forget Bashir and the rest of them trying to make sure that they have this balance in politics for governance to really go on. Finally, let's get straight to what is happening in Afghanistan. Violence again in Afghanistan. It's like, you know, after the school was destroyed, by militants, by Taliban. They were trying to conduct an election, trying to bring the Taliban into the government. It's like that deal has been jettisoned because of disagreement between this group. Because the Taliban, they were recognized as a terrorist group, but to some persons, they are freedom fighters. And don't forget that the Taliban were also used in cause of this Afghanistan crisis to, you know, fend off so many other perceived enemies of the West. Yes, all of a sudden, when interest came into the table, what do you think happened? All right, everyone started flying their own color. Okay, now right now the Taliban and of course the terrorist group in Afghanistan, they are not backing down. We're talking about suicide bombs. We're talking about destabilizing, destroying government establishments, scattering schools, making sure that education is like taking centuries backward because of the fight, escalated violence in Afghanistan. People are not asking, was it a huge mistake for Barack Obama and of course Donald Trump to finally call back American troops from Afghanistan? Do you think that they should send back the troops to maintain law and order in that country? Or is it a little too late for anything to be done to restore peace in that country? We'll keep watching to see how they're going to resolve this issue, because believe you me, fighting, violence, it just keep on escalating in Afghanistan. Ours is to report back to you. Right now, we want to go on a break. When we return, I'll be introducing my guest on this particular topic because it's like a raging topic globally in the Middle East. Everyone is watching keenly. Can Iran pull the wool over the eyes of other nations to make sure they have nuclear capability? Or would Israel fold its arm and see Iran have that ability to harness nuclear power? That is what we'll take a look at today's discussion segment on International Forum. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The first thing is to be honest with yourself. You can never have an impact on society if you have not changed yourself. And one of the most important weapons in changing yourself is to recognize that is, people.
It all began some years ago when Iran chose to tell the world that it is ready to be able to harness nuclear power to do some wonderful thing in pharmacy, in agriculture, and of course in power generation. But Israel taking a look at the suggestions with a page, or like, you know, taking a look at a suggestion as a country seeking to develop nuclear capability. Israel jettisoned it, but due to Iran being able to play their cards properly, were given the leverage to harness nuclear capabilities, but for the sole purpose of pharmaceutical trend going beyond that. And that was the reason why Israel, they reported the matter to the persons or the countries in charge of, you know, taking care of the proliferation of nuclear weapons globally, and Iran was told to stop. That didn't go down too well with them. They're saying that all countries agreed to it. Why the U.S. administration led by Donald Trump then is like kicking against it. All of a sudden, election was around the corner. Donald Trump lost, and when they went to investigate, it discovered that the cooling sea, or let's say the river used in cooling nuclear materials, when it's been manufactured or coupled, it has gone beyond what they expect. It indicated that Iran is trying to really get something of a nuclear capability. And right now, they sent some persons to the nuclear site to monitor what Iran is doing, and Iran isn't so comfortable about it. And Iran said, look, we're going to give you 1 extra month to be in our site. After that, you should please leave us to do what we ought to do. After all, you guys have agreed to give us that leverage to use our nuclear ability for the health reason, for agricultural reason, and of course, the U.S., they are watching keenly. How do you think this will pan out? With me here in the studio to talk about this, I have a lecturer, a political analyst, yes, a lecturer from UNIBEN. Join me to welcome Honorable Frank Amigo. Honorable, thank you so much for coming despite the notice given to you. I really appreciate your comment.
Thank you, Wilson. It's a pleasure being here.
All right, so here we are. Iran is on the table again, still on this particular nuclear deal, and they are saying that given the world governing body on nuclear empowerment, so to speak, 1 month to remain in sight, after which they want them to leave for them to be able to work properly. What do you feel about this development?
Well, it's a rather unfortunate situation. An agreement reached. US was there, Germany, Russia, China, and some other nations. And before 2015, it took them up to 12 years to arrive at coming together and to meet in 2015. That was the time of President Obama.
Barack Obama.
So along the line, they came up with a document, Joint Comprehensive Program on Action. Joint Comprehensive Program on Action, JCPOA. So that was reached, and it was largely applauded by way of having a diplomatic agreement in the world. But Israel and the Gulf countries were not happy about it because in the quote, they are all neighbors. So while that continued, Israel was never happy the day one of it, because they know the kind of people the Iranians are. So it's the kind of, the more you look, the less you see. So at the point where 3 years after the agreement, Donald Trump didn't see the need to be part of that agreement, so he withdrew from it. In other words, the US withdrew from that agreement. And now Donald Trump is not there again as president of America. Joe Biden is the president. As I tell you, so it's possible that at that time, Joe Biden was privy to that agreement. They would have all agreed. So now is the turn of Joe Biden as president now. So there's every likelihood that Joe Biden will want to go back to that agreement. Just last week here, the Israeli government sent some high-level intelligence and some other personalities to Washington, D.C. to appeal to the conscience of comprehensive program of action. So what we're saying, but there's a place for regulation. There's a place for caution. So the challenge Israel is having with Iran is if these people go unchecked, because from that joint comprehensive program of action, it was resolved that the Iran till 2025 is not yet 2025. So if they're asking for 1 month for every other person to withdraw from it so that they could do anything they wanted, they are calling for war. No wonder some Israeli top officers are saying that there should be a preemptive strike. But the way Iran is going now, let's just strike. But some are thinking that the shadow war will not materialize to a full-blown war. In the midst of not believing that, some persons are thinking, let's just strike and see their reaction.
The reaction.
And humanly, that's the best thing, tactically, because you don't know what your enemy has in stock. Let's just strike.
Until you poke your enemy.
Let's just see their reaction. So I think the reviews are divided. So what we are having now, Israel does not trust Iran, and aligning with some Gulf countries around there, they don't trust them because if they go unchecked, there's this existential threat that they might wipe out a lot of countries around them. So whether these fears are real or imagined, there's every need for the world powers to come on board to understand the position of Israel. U.S. is so far away from this place we're talking about now, Iran and Israel. So they are closer to them. They know the way they behave. And the fears Israel is having, they are palpable. You can feel the fears. And with that, that's why they sent some of their top intelligence officers to Washington, D.C. last week to appeal to President Biden not to accept the comeback towards agreeing to that agreement. So what Donald Trump did then in May 2018 was to listen to Israel. But now it's not so clear whether the appeal Israel made to Joe Biden last week will be anything to go by. But whichever way it goes, Israel is ready. If Joe Biden accepts the appeal not to go back to that agreement, Israel knows what to do. If the reverse is the case, such that Joe Biden says, no, with what my former boss agreed to, I was part of it in 2015, I want to go back to it. Israel is still ready. But they are more concerned about the other neighboring countries around them. And because Israel is fully ready, by the time there's war breaking out in that region, there will be no in the Holy Bible. So one can extrapolate the step-by-step happenings and conclude, even without anything will break out. It's playing out now. So if America will accept that appeal, you will discover that Iran will have little or nothing to showcase anymore. But if they have the go-ahead by Joe Biden coming back to agree, in fact, Israel is ready for war. The shadow will vanish. The object will come up. No, before you have a shadow, there must be an object.
An object, yeah.
So we are not seeing the object yet. The object Israel is seeing is to terminate lives. That threat to existence, that's the actual object. The shadow we are seeing, there's no shadow you can see eyes. You won't see all the internal organs. But the object that Israel is looking at, they have extracted it, that the hidden intention of Iran is to wipe out so many countries, especially Israel. Other Arabic nations around them, they may not have the such privileged information that Israel has. It took them more than 12 years before they could come together in 2015 to have that joint comprehensive program of action. So if I told you yes to a particular thing now, you know, humanly, I want to keep to the yes I told you years back.
Yeah.
But by way of human reasoning, I would have been right at that time. But now events have played out such that my rightness now won't be right this time. So it's left for Joe Biden, if he has the interest of these whole earth in his own mind, is not for him to go back. He shouldn't go back signing that agreement. And the way Iran is going about it, they are so much in a hurry. Hurry in the sense that you were told, let's monitor what you're doing till 2015. And it was agreed. That's number one. Number two...
No, 2025.
2025, I mean.
Yes.
2025. Number two, that the sanctions, Iran is asking that those sanctions placed on them be withdrawn. So, if America, or let's say UN, EU, and the rest refuse to withdraw those sanctions, I will say here on this platform that Iran, with or without sanctions, with or without agreement, Iran will go ahead to becoming what they ever had in mind to become. So that's the fear that Israel is having. Otherwise, there will be no need for Israel to send people to Washington, D.C. last week to appeal to Joe Biden not to assent to it. Because Israel is looking at it at a global view. Left for us as a nation, Israel, we can defend ourselves. But when you say there's a king, there should be people around a king. If you are a world power, you are a world power over one country. So Israel still want to be in that committee of world powers. So if Iran fully develops this, that technology, it will take them up to 10 years to fully develop what they want to do now. And Israel has done the calculations. So it's an appeal. If Joe Biden can also hear me, that don't sign or don't go back to that agreement. You did indirectly then in 2015 without knowing the details. But now we know the plans of Iran that they want to threaten human existence, not just in that Gulf region, the whole earth. That's their plan.
Well, you said that's their plan, but some Iranians are saying that is not their plan. They just want to protect their own territory. And moreover, they talked about them going deep into medicine, going deep into pharmacy, going deep into agriculture, and they need all these things to be on the ground. Nuclear capability in those aspects.
I don't think so. Even if they said so, that's not true. You know, the way we spy on each other, Israel has been spying on Iran. If I told you that your parcel of land behind your house, I want to use it for farming, you will likely agree. Then when I started planting, the next thing I brought some surveyors to map out certain things. Then you saw me bring surveyors to survey the land. You call me to order. So you said you're going to plant crops. How come you want to do the planning of this whole expanse of land I gave to you? So what Israel is saying, what you said as a nation, Iran, was right. But what you are planning, what you intend to achieve is far beyond what you have told us. So that's the situation Israel has found itself, and it will take the collaborative efforts of other nations, Germany, Russia, China, to also agree. And before they came to US, if US agrees, very, very likely that all these other nations will agree to withdraw from that agreement.
All right. Now, there was a comment made by the Israeli foreign minister saying that whether US is in tune with this or not, we know how to defend ourselves. And do you know that that comment would just preempt a strike? Because some of the top generals have been like, suggesting that let's target the nuclear side, so to speak, right now of the Iranians to see what they are really up to. Do you see Israel going to that extent?
Yes, I think I once mentioned that.
Yeah.
That there are a group of persons, top Israeli personalities, that they should have a preemptive strike. Just test the waters. Let's see how deep it is. Just launch an attack. But we're not ready for war at the moment. Just mistakenly launch an attack. Let's have the feelers from them. So I'm sure they will likely do that. Because a large majority of people of Israel, they want that preemptive strike. Let's know what is really happening over there in Iran. Because the way they're actually going, when Donald Trump was the president, it might be rash in his disposition. But if you remove all of those things and look at it objectively, Donald Trump was right. Donald Trump also had an instinct concerning Iran, that what they are saying is different from what they intend to do. So what Israel has found itself in now is like trying to be a prophet to the whole world. That if you allow these people go ahead, they are not after medicine, they are not after agric, they are not after power supply. What they want to do is to take over the world system. I'm sure those delegations that went to see Joe Biden last week would have posed this challenge before Joe Biden. If you allow Iran to go ahead with their nuclear plan, what if Iran becomes the next superpower? And that makes you go down. I'm sure the U.S. will not allow that. Ignoring all sentiments, they want to retain their position as the #1 country in the whole world. So as a U.S. president, you are very likely the president of the whole earth. So would you want to relinquish that over nothing? So I'm sure if Joe Biden thinks deeper, he will accept that going to sign that agreement again will be at their own detriment.
Well, now, if you can go double memory lane, you get to realize that a top scientist of Iran that has knowledge in nuclear ability was taken off the board. and Iran was accusing Israel. That was some few months ago. Is it related to this nuclear deal, or do you think that that is like a plot, so to speak, right now by the Israeli intelligence to really make sure that there's a setback in Iran achieving their nuclear dream? Though they denied it.
Is one and the same thing.
Yeah.
The challenge Israel is having, if they could, no, sorry, the challenge that Iran is having,
yeah.
If they could relocate Iran to another continent so that we have peace. Israel is bumper to bumper, following every step they take, every move they make. So Iran is not comfortable with the presence of Israel, and Israel is not even blinking. Anything done in Iran, Israel is interested. Anything whatsoever, because there is a suspicious nation to Israel. Whatever anything anybody says at this point, they want to see it beyond the ordinary. And for Israel to see such things means they have a proof, kind of, to suspect Iran, and thereafter suggest a way out towards making them not to actualize the evil plan. So that's the situation.
What plan is the evil plan?
Evil in the sense that...
Because according to the Iranians, they have the right to own nuclear capability. They're not saying it openly. They say they don't want to go into the war aspect of it. This is what they really want to use it for. As a nation, after all, some countries, they do have it. Why can't Iran have it?
Nobody is stopping them from having it.
But they are stopping them from having it already. Taking out their own top scientists.
Yes.
I mean, is that not a slap on their face?
Iran is not stopped in any way. From that agreement, I read through today.
Yeah.
So that agreement is a JCPOA. That's a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
Of action.
So what that document suggests to me is a form of regulation. You don't say because you have a thing, you use it the way you like. For instance, you have a vehicle. Now you are told by government officials that you can't drive this vehicle. It's not roadworthy. It's your vehicle. That you can't drive it, they won't give you another vehicle. So there should be a way to regulate it. Your vehicle particulars have expired. They will tell you you can't drive it. You'll be arrested. It's your own vehicle. So if we live in a place, in a world that does not have regulation. So that agreement in 2015 was to regulate the use of nuclear power. But as I said earlier, Israel, from day one that thing was signed, was not happy. Despite the celebration worldwide that it was a good development trying to regulate it. It's the regulation that Iran is not happy about. They don't want to be regulated. And if there's anything in life that doesn't have a regulation, even as a husband, your wife regulates you. As a wife, your husband regulates you. Even as parents, your children regulate you, and vice versa. So if you live in a war system where there's no regulation, then you are planning a thing beyond what you are saying or what we are seeing. So that's the standpoint of Israel, that what you are manufacturing in any way does not agree with your intention. If you want to have access to good agricultural practices, you are manufacturing AK-47. Are you going to be shooting the soil to produce mango or cashew? So what you are manufacturing in no way is not in tandem with your initial plan. What you have gazetted that you will do, the procedure you have brought before the world now is different. The procedure will produce a different thing entirely. Entirely from what you earlier suggested. If I told you I want to make rice, then I brought cassava, I brought okra. That is not rice anymore. I can't even see a grain of rice in that recipe. So Israel is monitoring. Israel knows what he's talking about. So that's why they went to America to tell them, this thing these people are planning is beyond what we are seeing. I have the opinion that the US president will see it in the light upon which Israel has presented the matter.
All right. Now, if we take a look at the score between Israel and, of course, the Palestinians, occasioned by Hamas attacking Israel, releasing thousands of rockets, launching it at Israel, do you think that is part of a test from Iran? Because there's this hypothesis that there's this link between Iranians and the Hamas group. Can you relate it to this nuclear deal?
They are all related. What Israel is saying now is visit or nisit. N-I-S. Visit or nisit. So the point of view that Israel is having now, there's nothing that will enter into the land of Israel that is not viewed with suspicion. Because the way Israel is located among them is so pathetic in a way that they will have to sleep with one eye closed. So Israel has become so sensitive to any territorial invasion, no matter how mild it will be. They will look at it and view it in a perspective that other matters will need to arise from it. Because you know the neighborhood you have found yourself. If it was a peaceful neighborhood, you could even travel without closing your door. But now you lock up your door, you still have to stay by the door to be listening to whether or not there will be external intruders. So what Israel is saying and what they are feeling, whatever attack that would have come into Israel is not unconnected with the hidden plans of the Iranians. So they are all intertwined.
Well, now, still talking about the shadow between Israel and, of course, Iran. Because talk about shadow, although it's not the real thing, but it's there. And the world is like so worried that this shadow war is assuming a worrisome dimension. What do you think the world really have to fear in all of this?
So Israel's position is clear. That we commonly say it in our pidgin English, that if you are an expert in separating a fight, why don't you initially become an expert in stopping a quarrel? So I want to be an expert, I can separate any form of fighting. But it's better for you to learn and understand that it's from quarreling that people start fighting. So Israel's position now is, let's stop the quarreling. Iran doesn't want to listen to any human being. Iran is after the outcome of the meeting that took place in US last week. So there are fears also from their end that if Joe Biden does not come back to agree with that document, very likely they'll go ahead. They are not going to look back at any point in time. Israel is saying if they fully develop those nuclear powers, the next thing, the whole earth will be in trouble occasioned by Iran. And Iran will not spare Israel in the first instance. Though Israel is saying, even with the development of those nuclear reactors, we can withstand them. They are also well equipped. But what about the neighboring nations? What about nations in other continents? Won't all these things affect them? We're talking about nuclear power now. They can shoot from Iran and can affect other continents. So what now plays out is this whole earth will be in turmoil. And Israel does not want that.
Now let's take a look at the UN perspective in all of this. Though we have a group that are responsible for this particular regulation of nuclear armament, so to speak, what do you think is the stand of the United Nations in all of this? Because it was still the presence of the UN, so to speak, that Iran, according to reports, breached the contract. And Israel raised an alarm. People think that Israel was lying, to not discover that Israel was really saying the truth, that these guys, they've gone beyond the agreement. Do you see them going beyond the agreement this time in the presence of the United Nations?
Yes. Well, if you look at ECOWAS now, if you want to say ECOWAS, you're talking about Nigeria. If you're talking about AU, African Union, you're talking about Nigeria. Same way by extension, if you say UN, is US you are talking about. US is a major player as far as UN activities are concerned. So instead of going globally as UN, they went straight to US. US, if you agree with us now, UN will have no choice. So if you're able to win the US to themselves, that's Israel, then UN will have no choice other than to follow what US has said. So UN now is not saying anything. Germany is there, Russia is there, China is there, so they're not saying anything. Everybody is looking back to hear and to listen to what US will say. Yeah. So the UN